Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to Grace Church, our Good Friday service. In a moment, we're going to be meditating on the death of our Savior, Jesus. But before we move further, I want to sort of help you maybe engage a little bit with us. So if you're watching from home or somewhere in a room, I want you to turn down the lights. And if you happen to have a candle, go grab a candle and light one as we move through our readings and our worship time tonight. If you don't have a candle, don't worry about it. You could use mine as your candle. We'll share this candle right here. I want to start by reading a prophetic passage in Isaiah. Now, Isaiah wrote this some 700 years before Jesus was born. But as we read it, it sounds like he was a contemporary. That's how well this prophetic picture draws for us the suffering servant. You remember on Palm Sunday, we looked at the humble king. Tonight, we're going to look at the suffering servant king. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 3 through 11. And I'm reading in the NLT. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. Yet it was for our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought that his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Unjustly condemned, he was led away. No one cared that he died without descendants, that his life was cut short in midstream. But he was struck down for the rebellion of my people. He had done no wrong and had never deceived anyone. But he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave. But it was the Lord's good plan to crush him and cause him grief. Yet when his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. He will enjoy a long life, and the Lord's good plan will prosper in his hands. When he sees all that is accomplished by his anguish, he will be satisfied. And because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins.
Became sin, who knew no sin, that we might become his righteousness. He humbled himself and carried the cross. Love so amazing, love so amazing. Jesus Messiah, the name of Jesus Messiah, name above all names, the blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, the rescue for sinners, the ransom from heaven, Jesus Messiah, Lord of all, Jesus Messiah, Lord of all.
Tonight, we're going to take a look at 3 portraits of the suffering servant king from the Gospels. The first portrait is going to come out of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, verses 36 to 46, as we see Jesus serving the Father's will in submission. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Many of us are familiar with the garden scene. It is the emotional agony of Jesus that we see as he beseeches his Father. He comes to the realization, knowing that the path that he's on will lead him to a horrible death on a cross. And so, in the garden, he cries out to his Father. And he says, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. But nevertheless, your will be done. This is a miraculous picture of how much the Son trusts the Father. In essence, this is a real picture of what faith is, what trusting in God is all about. Jesus is so secure in the Father's love that he's willing to endure pain and agony in obedience to his will, knowing that the Father's way is the best way, is the most loving way. And so he agonizes, he struggles. This submission is not something lighthearted. It's not something just in his head or in his heart. This is real. This is a real struggle. He is now going to face the kind of violence that we can scarcely imagine. What moves him to submit like this? He trusts his Father, and he loves us. And those are the encouragements that Jesus leans on and needs to see the Father's will through. He surrenders and he submits, not just an attitude of mind and heart, but this is real action. As he agonizes in the garden 3 times, he prays the same prayer. That's how burdened his heart is. But after all is said and done, after even his best friends, his disciples, have fallen asleep, he gets up, and the submission goes from prayer to act. And he submits himself to the Father's will by handing himself over to the betrayers, to the sinners, those who will, as you'll see in a moment, mock him, hurt him, brutalize him. But this is Jesus serving the Father in complete and utter submission, a submission that you and I could never practice. We could never submit ourselves like that perfectly. But Jesus does it as a sacrifice for sin, for you and for me.
I'm holding on to faith, 'cause I know you'll make a way. And I don't always understand, I don't always get to see, but I will believe it. Yes, I will believe it. 'Cause you make mountains move, you make giants fall. You use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, I will preach to my doubt that you were faithful then, you'll be faithful now. I'm standing on your word, I'm calling heaven down to earth, and you will fight my enemies. This will end in victory, and I will believe it. Yes, I will believe it. 'Cause you make mountains move, you make giants fall. You use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, and I will preach to my doubt that you were faithful
second portrait of the suffering servant king comes from the Gospel of Mark, where we see Jesus serving the Father's will in real suffering. Mark chapter 14, verses 65 to 72. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with the Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And when he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girls saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. In Mark 15, verses 17 to 20, they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of his purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. Here is the portrait of the suffering servant king enduring real pain, real agony. What makes this barely conceivable is who Jesus is. Jesus is none other than God come to us as one of us, the Son of God, fully human, fully divine. Did you not think that at any point in time during this mockery, during this violence, that Jesus could have just snapped his fingers and made it all go away, made them all go away? Because he is the Son of God. All things were made by him and for him. All glory is to him. But he doesn't say anything. In the mockery, in the spitting, in the beating, he remains silent and he suffers. This doesn't just show real suffering. It also shows real rebellion. And you might think it's difficult to consider the imagery of Jesus being beaten and suffering, and we've seen even films that sort of display this really brutal way of dying. But there's another picture here. And it's not just a picture of Jesus' suffering, it's a picture of your rebellion and mine. See, the people mocking and spitting, the people that are beating him, mocking, paying homage and saying, "Oh, King of the Jews," making fun of him, that's a picture of you and me. I know that's, for some of you, that might be difficult to embrace. You say, "Well, that's not me, that's not me." Well, stop. Let's consider together. Let's meditate on this for a moment. And let's be honest. My life, as hard as I can try to do the right thing, oftentimes I live in a way that doesn't even seem I believe in God. Sometimes I say things out of anger or say things in an impromptu, inappropriate way, and it betrays that, do I even know God? Do I even care? See, that's us. Because we think we know better. Because we choose to go our way instead of God's way. When you read the story of the suffering servant, and particularly the violence that was perpetrated on him, be careful not to read it as, oh, those people over there were hurting Jesus. Think of it this way. That's how fallen you and I are in here. That even when God himself comes to us as one of us, when he comes to us, we don't even recognize him. In fact, we don't want anything to do with him. This is what sin has done to you and to me. It has turned us away from God. It has blinded us to the beauty and the magnificence and the grace and the glory and the holiness and the righteousness of who God really is. And to restore that beautiful vision, Jesus comes and he endures real suffering. He endures our rebellion. Why? Because he loves you and he loves me in spite of our sin. He's come to finally and fully remove the penalty, the power of sin, and to heal us. As Isaiah said, he was whipped so that we can be made whole.
There was a moment when the lights went out, when death had claimed its victory. The King of love had given up his life. It's the darkest day in history. There on the cross they made for sinners. For every curse his blood atoned. One final breath and it was finished. But not the end we could have known. For the earth began to shake, and the veil was torn. But sacrifice was made as the heavens roll. And all hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world. Oh. There was a moment when the sky lit up, a flash of light breaking through. When all was lost, he crossed eternity. The King of life was on the move. Or in a dark old tomb, where our Lord was laid, one miraculous breath, and we're
Jesus serves the Father's will in submission. Jesus serves the Father's will in suffering. In our third portrait tonight, we see that Jesus serves the Father's will in selfless love. There are two characters that stand out in the story at the very end when Jesus is being crucified. So let me read John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27, and then Luke 23, 39 and 43. So John 19, starting in verse 26. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. Luke 23, verses 39 to 43. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." The final portrait of Jesus serving the Father's will in selfless love. As he's enduring the torment, as he's enduring the physical violence, as he surrenders himself as the sinless sacrifice, he is mindful of his mother, Mary. He is mindful of the lone woman that he's leaving behind. He cares for her and for her future, and so makes provision for her, even while he is racked with pain. He looks and he says to the disciple, "This is now your mother." And he says to Mary, "This is now your son." And in an act of incredible selflessness and selfless love, he takes care of Mary. Love and grace even at this point in his life. He turns, and there's a criminal on his left and his right, and one is railing against him. The other is penitent, and he has a singular request. As he's suffering punishment for the life that he's lived, because he understood, he knew that his condemnation was appropriate. It was the right thing because he had done wrong. He was a criminal. He was convicted. He was guilty. And yet he looks at Jesus and he asks this one request: "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus turns to this guilty man, this convict, this criminal, and he says, "Certainly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise." Selfless love, grace given. Jesus came to give that kind of grace, that kind of love, not just to Mary, not just to a criminal, but to all who are broken, to all who are lonely, to all who are alienated, to everyone who is fearful of their future, to everyone who feels insecure. He comes to provide grace and mercy and love. He comes also for the guilty and the condemned, for those of us that have made a mess of our life, for those of us that have gone our own way, making train wreck after train wreck, or worse yet, thinking that we are living the greatest life ever because we have made ourselves the center of life. God now is in our image. Imagine the twisted nature of that. How many of us live as if we're God. We call the shots. We're guilty, aren't we? And yet, even in that guilt, even in that condemnation, Jesus looks with eyes of mercy and grace. This is selfless love. He gives himself up, his sinless life, so that you can have mercy and grace, so that you could be made whole.
I've heard it said that a man would climb a mountain just to be with the one he loved. How many times has he broken that promise? It has never been done. I've never climbed the highest mountain, but I walk the hill of Calvary, and just to be with you, I would do anything. There's no price I would not pay, no, and just to be with you, I would give everything. I would give my life away. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard it said that a man will swim the ocean just to be with the one he loved. And all of those dreams are an empty motion. It can never be done. I've never swam the deepest ocean, but I walked upon the raging sea, and just to be with you, I would do anything. There's no price I would not pay, no, and just to be with you, I would give everything. I would give my life away. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know that you don't understand the fullness of my love, how I died upon the cross for your sins. And I know that you don't realize how much that I gave you, but I promise that I would do it all again. And just to be with you, I've done everything. There's no price I did not pay, no. And just to be with you, I gave everything. Yes, I gave my life away. Yeah, 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 I gave my life away. Yeah, 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 just to be with you. Oh, just to be with you. Oh, just to be with you. Oh, just to be with you.
After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A jar full of sour wine stood there. So they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.